Okay, so I think I will just start the talk. I'm sure that everybody can hear me very loud now. So I'm Hugo Messe. I came to Indonesia about 1 year back, and then there was a small conference organized by some Indian guys in the Ritz just on the other side of the road, and I think we had about 25 people there. And I had prepared a talk about distributed teams, because that's actually my background. I have a lot of experience with teams in India and Ukraine, and working with clients in Western Europe. So I thought that's nice to share. And most people were looking at me like, what is this guy talking about? Because most of the questions in that room were actually, so what's Scrum? Or what's Agile? I feel that today, in the last year, it has actually matured a lot. And I'm assuming that you're not going to ask me what's Scrum. Maybe if you want, it's actually okay. But I've seen that Agile is picking up in Indonesia. It's becoming more popular. And today we have about 300 people. So that's more than 10 times what we had on that small conference last year. Now I want to share some of the experiences I have about becoming Agile in Indonesia based on my experience in the last year. Because I moved to Bali in July or June last year. And then a few months later, I decided to start a community in Bali, Jakarta, those two places, and later on Jogja as well with Yanni here. And I saw that there's a lot of demand for such a community and more sharing on Agile and Scrum. So based on that and the trainings and coaching that I have done in some of the companies here, like BTPN and Genius, I want to share some of that experience. So I'll share a bit about my background, or a bit more, so you understand where I come from. Then I share my perspectives on what Agile is actually about. Yeah, I think that's always an important question. And I think there's three sort of phases that enterprises go through if they adopt agility. Then how to do this in Indonesia, at least my perspective on that, because I don't think there's one way or one answer to that question. And then I'll wrap up. So it takes about 30 minutes, and then we'll have about 10 minutes for discussion. If you have a question in between, just feel free. So I'm from Belanda, and for today I thought I just don't wear those shoes, because normally, of course, we do in Holland. We walk around like that, and there's all tulips, but today I thought it's better to wear normal shoes. I moved to Bali, so I changed my perspective to this view now. I didn't take this picture, but I think it's Bali somewhere. It's a beautiful island, and some places it's a macet like Jakarta. So, but still, there are some places where it looks like this. I took my family to Bali as well, so my kids go to school there, and I feel like I'm sort of established in Indonesia now. My story starts actually in 2004. At least I was born a bit earlier than that, but that's when I started my first company. And I made a trip to India in 2004 and realized, okay, I want to do something with outsourcing to India, because in that period, around the end of the 90s, a lot of American companies were moving their work to India. And I figured that usually Europe is a few years behind. So I decided, okay, if the Americans are doing that, then probably Europe is going to pick up on that very soon. When I came back, I started a company called Bridge Global. Initially, it was a sort of intermediary, so I had some teams in Ukraine, in Eastern Europe, and they were developing software for clients in Holland. Over time, I set up my own offices in Ukraine and India, and our biggest office is in India right now. And today, I'm in the luxury position that I have a management team running the company, and that's why I could actually live in that beautiful Bali and come here and share my experiences. So in the first period from 2005 to 2010, I cried a lot, because I had no experience with software development. I didn't know about outsourcing, and I think I made all the mistakes that one could when starting such a company. And I realized that one of the issues is this. All the projects that we took, and we were really running projects, so I would take requirements from my clients, then I would send it to my team in India. They analyze those requirements, and they say, yeah, I think it's going to take 5 months. Yeah? This is the budget. They gave me a beautiful planning, and then I sold the client with a markup, and 80% of the projects go all right, but that last 20% is kind of disaster. You end up in court, you have a lot of fights, and that's what I realized, okay, especially if you have teams in different countries working across geographies, this model is very hard. Yeah? because there's too many handoffs, it's too remote, the clients are not sort of engaged with the projects that they are running with you. And in 2011 I came across Scrum, and I first thought, oh, it's my competitors using some buzzword to sell more of their services. But in 2011 I did a CSM training with an Indian guy who came to Amsterdam, and that opened my eyes, and I saw that, you know, the time-boxed approach of Scrum and the meeting rhythm that is built in and the clear rules helps a lot to structure the software development process, especially if you work with different locations and cultures. Because again, with this hands-off waterfall approach, you get too much distance between what needs to be built and what the people are really building. And there's no link with the users, no link with what the developers are really doing. And Scrum removes that. So I realized, okay, if I introduce Scrum to my teams in India and Ukraine, then things are probably going to go better. So I tried to get more of my team into Scrum and Agile, send them to some certification courses and trainings, and that helped a lot. So I still cried a lot 2011 till now. Well, now I don't cry that much anymore, but it helped a lot, and it, you know, made clients more happy and stable. So since I came to Indonesia, as I said, I started the community, and then I recently started Equipa. I hired my first colleagues last week, so it's very recent, but we started giving trainings. The first training was actually in Genius in December, I believe. So Equipa is actually training and coaching on agility and adopting Scrum and Agile transformations. So the first general question that I want to discuss is, what is Agile really about? So, in my view, there are three perceptions on Agile, or phases that a company goes through. The first one is, it's a new way of developing software. That's the first notion. People adopt agility or Scrum with the idea, okay, the traditional methods don't work, so if we go for Agile, the software development process works better. So we start with IT. Yeah? So what happened in the past is, like 200 years ago, we invented factories. We thought, okay, if this guy here gets some very strict routines, and you know, we hire the lowest capable person to follow those routines, and then everybody does his job. In the end of the cycle, we'll get predictable outcomes, products from this process, and we can, if somebody orders 1,000 products, then we know exactly when we can deliver this and according to which quality standards. And then what happened when the IT industry, the software industry, started growing is we applied that same logic to software development. Maybe somebody still uses this kind of planning. Who makes plannings like this for software projects? Okay, we can stop the talk. So what we did is, okay, we break a project into modules, and then we say, okay, in phase one, I don't know exactly what this planning is about, but this is a PMI-based planning. Yeah, so we said, we can predict the whole software application that we are going to build. So if we build a new ERP package, it takes us 12 months to complete this. Yeah? Then this will be phase one. We make module 1, 2, 3, etc. And then by the end of the 12 months, we've got our product done. Yeah? Our ERP package will be finished in 12 months, and it will be a good package. But unfortunately, it doesn't end up that way always. So in a lot of cases, we realize, okay, we build software in that way, and then the quality is not good, or the budget goes 5 times over the estimate that we had, or it takes 3 more years instead of the 1 year we planned. Yeah? So we learned as human beings that this process of the factory doesn't apply to software development. We cannot predict what's going to happen because it's a creative process. And then in 2001, some guy said, okay, based on our experience, there's a better way of doing this, and they created the Agile Manifesto. I'm not going to go into that because I think it's going to be discussed by other speakers, but what they said is, based on our experience, we want to give a very simple set of guidelines to the software industry so that they can prevent the failures that we have found in the traditional methods. So they defined 12 principles, and they said if people follow those principles, apply that to their organization, then the software development will get better. So the essence is, instead of making this 12 months planning with very big requirement documents and strict deadlines and budgets, we're going to work in iterations. We describe on a high level what kind of things we want in our product seen from the user perspective, so not technical but the user, and then we just start. We do an iteration of 2, 3, 4 weeks, as short as possible, but 2 weeks seems to be a good balance. And then every iteration we deliver a piece of our software, we show it to our audience or to our users or stakeholders, and then based on the feedback we get, we do the next iteration, and that's how we go. So that's the basic notion of waterfall compared to Agile as a new way of developing software. It all starts in the IT department in most organizations. Now, a lot of people ask, okay, what's the difference between Agile and Scrum? And this graph is taken from Scrum Alliance. So I'm pretty confident that this is a bit biased, but most companies adopt Scrum. If they want to go Agile, they start with Scrum, and as you see, Kanban is actually picking up a lot. So a lot of companies use a mix of those two, or Scrumban, or one team use Kanban and the other use Scrum, etc. And if a company gets more mature in Agile, it's also natural to start experimenting with other frameworks. So for me, Agile is more about culture, a shift in the way we perceive software development. And Scrum is a framework that helps us to become Agile. The second evolution in Agile is that it's about mindset and culture. So usually it starts with an IT team, and then we have 1 or 2 teams who are running Scrum or Kanban, and this team soon realizes that they can't work in isolation. So they reach their boundaries after a few iterations or a few months, because they realize if the CEO and the stakeholders and the business owners are actually still in the old mindset and see this Agile thing as an IT game, then we're going to run into problems. Because the CEO will say, he wakes up in the morning, I heard this story yesterday from somebody, the CEO wakes up, goes on WhatsApp and says, okay, I want you to change this, that and that. And then we're in the middle of the sprint and the CEO said it, so we have to do that because he's the CEO, and this derails our sprint. So that means if the stakeholders don't really understand what's happening with Agile, they're going to derail everything and it won't work. So companies realize, okay, in order to make that accepted in the broader context within our company, we need to change the mindset of our CEO. That's a common guy who kind of destroys the process. And we need to change the culture. I hope there's no CEOs today. So for me, there's a few things that are crucial in this mindset or culture that we want to create if we want to become Agile. The first is about self-organization. I'm going to come back to this in the context of Indonesian culture, but I believe self-organization is at the core. We want to make sure that teams can self-organize their work without a boss or team lead or project manager giving instructions, and without the CEO disrupting those sprints that we're doing. So self-organization is a crucial element of agility. We want people to rely on their own capabilities, their own judgment, and do the work as they believe they should do it. The second is we should create openness. Now, openness is one of the core values in Scrum. So it's not something that is mentioned literally as openness in the Agile Manifesto, but openness makes sure that if a team is self-organized, that people resolve conflicts and problems and blockers by talking to each other. Because we don't have this team lead or leader that we can go to solve our issues, but we need to be open and transparent and make everything clear, so we can work together and solve our issues and keep moving. This is something that is not really mentioned in the Agile context. You know it so well now? Yeah. So I don't know if anybody knows this book. It's very old. I think I read it 15 or 20 years back. But it's about monkeys, and I believe it's very applicable to Agile. The logic that he explains, and I recommend reading this book, it's very thin, is there's a monkey. Yeah? So if I'm a developer, for example, and I work in a team, and the monkey is on my the monkey that I have on my shoulder is I need some information from our clients. What usually happens is I walk up to my project manager and I ask him, can you please talk to that client because I need some information and it's blocking me from doing my work. And the moment this project manager says yes to me, the monkey jumps on his shoulder. So this monkey represents a problem or an issue that I have. Now what we want in Agile and self-organization is that this monkey stays on the shoulder where it belongs. Yeah? I'm the developer. I can actually go to the client myself, self-organize my solution, and keep the monkey here. So we don't need that project manager. Project manager is a terminology that we don't really like in Agile either. Yeah? It's a Scrum Master, but not project manager. So the monkey stays on somebody's shoulder. If you have a problem, just solve it, get it done, so we don't have to bother 2 people and occupy 2 people to solve the same problem. The fourth notion for me, and this is just my own opinion, but I think Agile is also about a river. A river just flows, and the moment the water hits a rock, it's not going to stay there. Well, in a lake sometimes it does, but in a normal river it will just try to find a way around the rock, yeah? So it keeps flowing. So if we develop a piece of software and we figure out, okay, we have to go right instead of straight, then we turn right. So we keep going like this, and it keeps going. So it's not a canal, but it's a river. It's about flow, which is also a notion in Kanban, by the way. So the third thing, or the third phase that I see companies go through with agility is business agility. Now, Evan Laybourne, who is doing a talk in the next room, he's one of the sort of evangelists of business agility. Yeah? And in my notion, this is about becoming more like startups. Because the moment we have started with IT, and then we have realized, okay, we have to spread this mindset throughout the stakeholders and the people surrounding the IT department, we realize, okay, this helps us a lot because we become more agile, more flexible, we can produce products like startups do, and we want to spread it throughout the whole enterprise. So we don't limit it to IT, but we look at procurement, to HR department, marketing, sales, because all those departments can actually adopt agility. Yeah? If you look at HR, for example, normally everything is organized like a continuous stream of work. Yeah? People go to work, I finish my priorities for today, and then I go home. Yeah? But I could also work in sprints, put everything on the wall, and work in a Scrum or Agile way to organize that HR work. So what typically happens here is, traditionally, like a bank is an example, yeah? Because banks are widely adopting Agile right now. That's why we're here today. Yeah? In the past, if I would be a client of a bank, I would go to this, it's probably the other way around, but I would go to the bank, yeah? And I would ask for money. Yeah? So I stand in the line, and then I have a form probably. Well, this is before our time, but I have a form and I want some money. Then I go to the clerk, that clerk will follow some routines, say, okay, here's your money, and then I sign something and I get it. Yeah? So this model is basically based on the factory where the bank clerk has routines, he goes through that, and we make sure that he follows the routines, because then we get a predictable outcome, yeah? me getting my cash. Now those banks see things like Bitcoin. Yeah? They think, okay, these guys might actually be making the bank accounts or the traditional banking system obsolete. Yeah? So we have to do something. Maybe it's not Bitcoin, but the next instance of Bitcoin, but this might catch them unaware. Yeah? So that could actually shake the financial industry completely. And in Indonesia, we have GoPay. I think this was launched maybe a year ago by Gojek. Am I right? Anybody from Gojek? 1 year? Yeah. So that's 1 year, and I think a lot of people already, who knows GoPay, by the way, here in the room? So that's what happens, and the banks see that. And now these guys don't have a banking license, but maybe in a few years they will, or something will change. So this might again make the whole bank account that we're used to obsolete. And banks see that, they observe, and they want to copy that. Yeah? They want to make sure that they're not going to be left behind. So what most of startups do, I'm not sure about Gojek, but they'll probably follow some sort of lean startup process. Who knows lean startup? Okay, just a couple. So there's a lot of bankers in, I think. So what startups, this comes from Silicon Valley. A guy, Eric Ries, wrote this, I think, 5 years back or something, and it's very widely adopted over there and starts being adopted here. And the essence is, again, we start with what they call an MVP, or a minimum viable product. So instead of making a year plan, then building our GoPay, and then launching it and realizing we built the wrong thing for the wrong people, and create 1 year waste of our 20 developers. We make an MVP, we build that, and then we launch it. So it's a very simple version of the product that we envision. We give it to our users. Then we measure what happens. Yeah? We collect data or interviews. And based on that input, we learn. We realize, okay, that's not what we need, but we need something else. Yeah? So we'll go a bit in another direction. And then we build the next iteration. And this way, startups build products in a flexible way. Of course, it also helps that most startups have people who are really motivated to work on that product. Yeah? And I think a good example of what I'm sharing here is also Genius. I haven't listened to Peter's talk, but Genius is basically a startup within BTPN. Yeah? So they allowed Peter to experiment with a new product to launch that. They gave him the funds, he hired a new team, and Genius almost operates as an isolated startup within the bank, and that seems to work. Yeah? So I think that's sort of the role model that we can use to change this routine-based traditional bank to more of a business agile startup kind of business. Yeah? Now the question is, how do you do that in Indonesia? Because these are all things that are very generic. I think Silvana has heard this kind of stuff 50 times because on all the agile conferences this is the standard material, but I think the question here is, how do we really apply that in Indonesia? So I came across this graph on the internet. I see that it's not very visible, but I think you can see. That's strange. On my screen it shows yellow, but here it does not. This is from Alistair Cockburn, and I think it's not very scientific, but I still liked it, so you could shoot this model, I believe. But what he did is, he took the model of Hofstede, that's a cultural scientist or anthropologist, and he made a model where he made 6 dimensions to map cultures across the world. So if we want to compare Indonesian culture with Indian culture, we can use these dimensions to see where they differ. And Alistair said, I think Alistair, by the way, is one of the subscribers of the Agile Manifesto. And he said, okay, let's take a mix of 3 of those factors from the Hofstede model. The power distance index, which shows how hierarchical a society is, yeah? Where Indonesia is on 78, yeah? So it's pretty high. And if you look at my country, it's 38. We're a very flat country and also flatly organized. We don't have mountains. So, and then masculinity, which shows how competitive or masculine an enterprise, or sorry, a culture is, versus femininity, which is more about compromise and consensus. Yeah? And then uncertainty avoidance, showing how open a culture is to change or to trying new stuff. Yeah? So he said if we mix those 3, we can actually show the influence of culture on agile adoption. So if you look at this graph, you can see that the US is light blue, India is, and Indonesia is. So I think that's good news. Because the US is pretty agile at the moment. And I think India is also ahead of Indonesia, because they have been doing agile for the last 5 or 10 years in a bigger scale. So Indonesia has the same color. If you look at China or Japan, for example, they are more dark blue. So the challenges for adopting agility there are, according to this graph, I've got no hands-on experience, but it seems to be harder to adopt agile over there. Now, if we look at the Indonesian culture, and if you don't agree with me, I'm very happy with that, but that's my view as a foreigner working with people in Indonesia for about a year now. And also with India, by the way. Same applies to India. The first thing I believe is important is that we learn how to move from a traditional command and control based organization to self-organization. But what I see in Indonesia is that this guy has a lot of power. He's got a very big ego and he is attached to status and he likes to say do this, do that. Anybody recognizes that? And then what happens, if you look at Agile, this is kind of anti-Agile, yeah? Because we want self-organization. And if this guy keeps saying do this, do that, then we're just going to follow him. Yeah? So we'll say, oh, yes, pa. Okay, pa. We'll do it. Yeah? Anybody ever said that? So that's a problem, because if we keep getting orders from a boss, then we can't be self-organized. Right? That's a big paradox. And this is very hard to change, I think, because everybody, I think in Indonesian culture we have, the father, the teacher, the guru, the boss, and we like to follow him. Yeah? That's kind of ingrained. So if we want to change that, we need rebels. Yeah? people who start wearing a t-shirt with this text on it, for example. I've never seen that, but I think it's a good idea. If the team accepts, okay, let's wear this, then the boss will understand. It might be a joke, but you need to do something. Where do you start if you want to change that culture? And you can't change the culture on a big scale, but in a team or with one manager or a boss, you can actually try that. So what the Agile Manifesto says is build projects around motivated individuals. And then you give them the sort of context or the guidelines that you want them to respect, and then you trust them to do the job. Like in agility, we have our product backlog. I'm a product owner. I own that backlog, and I describe on a high level what I believe the user needs, but then the team is going to figure out how to deliver on that. I'm not going to tell them how to do that. A project manager does, but a PO does not. So we need to trust them. The boss needs to become more of a mentor or a coach instead of this boss baby. And we trust the team to get the job done. And we trust ourselves also to go without that boss who tells us what to do and just do it, because we're smart people. The second thing is, I said that before, I believe we need to move towards more openness and transparency. Now, transparency is at the core of Agile, because we have the sticky notes, and that makes things transparent. We don't hide things in a laptop, but we put it on the wall, or maybe on the laptop, but then we make a board, and we become more open. So I think it's time to speak up. Now, as a Dutch, it's very easy to say this, because our culture is very open, and we're sometimes even proud of being direct, and I think it can be very blunt. I have one Dutch guy here in the room, so I think he agrees, but I think Dutch we're used to be very open and share everything. And sometimes this is also harsh. We can be too harsh, especially in an international context. But the thing is, in the Agile, like in agility, if we become more open, if we want to become more open, we need to speak up. And that's something I've noticed in Indonesian culture. People tend to keep things for themselves. We want our boss we want to respect our boss. We don't want him to lose face. So it's very hard for us to say, boss, I think there's a better way of doing this. That's something which is hard. Or if somebody made a mistake, to say, look, I think you made a mistake, and maybe we can talk about it so we can do it in another way. But I think if we want to become Agile, it's time to do that, to give those suggestions, and to also level up with people and openly discuss things. And then again, the transparency we can create easily by making boards. And what happens if you start using those boards to make the work visible, we have more moments where people can actually inspect what's being built and then adapt on a daily or weekly or sprint basis to go in the right direction. So this transparency is also crucial. And one of the things, I'm going to take an example of India. What I've noticed there in the work with India is that in a lot of cases, if I work with a team, there might be people who say every time, yeah, it's okay, don't worry, I'm going to finish before the deadline. If the deadline is end of the month, they'll say it's okay, we're in time, we're going to make it. And then it's end of the month, sorry, sir, we didn't really make it. I deliberately took India in this case. You guys don't do this. But this is what we can avoid if we have the transparent boards and we show everything. And the stakeholders like the CEO also join those sessions so they can see what is going on, instead of using WhatsApp to communicate stuff. The last thing I believe is important, and that's the most practical advice. What I believe is if we want our company to become more agile, we need to use a process of try, measure, learn. Like the lean startup model, build, measure, learn, but then try, measure, learn. That's what we want to do. I see some consultancies that make proposals for companies to do an agile transformation. And with 10 minutes. And what they will do is to say, okay, it takes about a year to get you to agile. First we go to phase 1, then we go through phase 2, and then in the end you will be agile. Now I don't think that works, because agile is about this river, we want to flexibly go somewhere. So how can you predict that? We're actually making the waterfall approach in order to become agile. So I think that's a big paradox. So I believe if we want to become agile, we also need to use a process that is agile in itself. So we want to get a boss, and then we define the culture of our boss. So we might say, okay, we want to start with one team, and then what's important for us, that team is going in that boss, and we define that, okay, in our boss, we want people who are open, who take responsibility, who are transparent, and whatever else you want. So you create the culture of your bus. And then you get people in your bus, or on your bus. Because you want to get the right people. Your first team should have people that actually support Scrum and Agile. You don't want the whiners or the people that don't want to change. You keep them out of the bus. Because if you get them on, it's not going to work. So if you have a PMO who's really attached to PMI, might not be the best pick to get that person on the bus. So once you get those right people on the bus, you decide, okay, what seats are they going to take? So you might say, okay, you guys go in the bus and figure out who's going to be the Scrum Master, the product owner, what hats you take. So to decide, you need to get the right people in the right seat, wearing the right hat. So maybe he's the Scrum Master, I'm not sure. And then those people say, okay, we're going to show the results. So we're going to run our projects using Scrum or Kanban or whatever it is, and we're going to show the results, and based on the success that we can achieve or not, because it might also, maybe you don't want to become Agile, maybe it fails, can also happen, but based on that success you try to scale it through the organization. So this shows how in Equipa we try to help organizations. It's usually once you have that team on your bus, we do a sort of team inception workshop. So we look at what project are we building, how does our product backlog look, what are the roles of each person, etc. So we make an instance to start with, and then we just do a mix of training and coaching. So the training teaches the new skills, and the coaching is somebody who has experience implementing Agile, and that person will help the team to really resolve things like, okay, how do I write a user story? How do I prioritize stuff based on value, etc. So you go through those loops, and once you show success with your first team or your first bus, you can scale it. So you can say, okay, the first team that booked success, now let's take 2 more teams, and we go through the same loop, and that's how we scale it. So it's a gradual process. So as a wrap-up, I think the most important thing to adopt agility in Indonesia is that we try to rethink the role of this baby bus. We try to, if we're a bus, we try to change our behavior and become more of a coach, a mentor. We try to become more open. We should be aware about this openness and make sure that our team respects each other and opens about any problem or issue that we have on the project or on the team. And then through a gradual process of try, measure, learn, we try to adopt agility and then scale it through the enterprise. That's my story. If you want to know more about me, you can go to my personal website or the Indonesian, or send me an email. I can give you my card, and I like WhatsApp messages.
Should I?
Sure. Yes.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. Hello. My name is Yogas. I'm from BTP and IT, and my question is more on the scaling part of the agile when a corporation decide to adopt agile, and they have this ring fence team is already running agile in some manner, but in the end we need to scale. I think the thing about scaling is that when we build this ring fence team and we do DevOps and everything, and we say this is dedicated, you build it, you fix it, and things like that, but this pioneering team needs to be like a change masters, right?
Yes.
So doesn't that means that the original team would not be spread, and then what happened with the original team that should take ownership of the product earlier?
So what you mean is, should we sort of dismantle a team and make people in that team who really support Agile and then go with them, or keep the team intact? That's what your question is about.
Yes, like in terms of scaling, what route that we need to take in your experience?
So again, my simplistic view on this is again that you need to start small. So you can start with that one team, and I can't judge that team you're talking about is the right team to start with, but if everybody in that team is open to this change, then probably that team can show, they can run for 3 months using Scrum, for example. You train them, you make sure that they understand Scrum, and that they can get support from the business owners that are working with that team. And then based on their success, you could gradually go to other teams in your department to scale that. And I think in BTPN there's a lot of experiments, like in the Genius department, they do a lot of Scrum. So we can also look at those teams, learn from them, and then adopt those practices in our own teams and spread it.
You want me to add something?
Yes, that's what I figured you were going to do.
So the essence of the question is, do you keep the original team or do you break it up? Yeah? And as in everything, the answer is it depends. But it depends on specific things. You can go either way. You can also, you have the option of keeping the original team, or at least the bulk, the majority of the original team, but have the team as a training ground. Either loan people out, you can do that on sprint by sprint basis, or bring people in as observers. Anybody can observe a sprint stand-up, and they will learn from that. So it is a training process, but the training takes a while, the training and the coaching. The people from the original team can help with that if they want, and also if it doesn't, there's also the pressure to deliver features and so on. So they may have this conflicting desire to stick to the schedule and deliver because that's what made the team successful, and help the others, but then does it sacrifice the original purpose? So it is a very fine balancing act, but you have those options.
Yeah, related to that question is actually with the deadline, because when you stick with, to be honest, with Indonesian people, when it's measured by time and schedule, sometimes it takes ages to wait from their deliver result.
That's not only in Indonesia.
Yeah, okay, but of course outside. But I mean, to be honest, that the difficulties is sometimes to for the people or the team to tell us when do you think is actually can be delivered sometimes. So how can you make sure that within the teams of Scrums to for that kind of complexities? Maybe some ideas.
There's two sides to that question. Again, first of all, what I just said about the second phase of agility, the stakeholders who are asking for this sort of planning, and they might still be attached to having budgets and a strict planning. So they will ask you, when is it ready? But if it's a big project and you run it in Agile, it's going to be hard to answer that question. Because the only thing you can say, okay, we think we need, 12 sprints, and we're going to try and deliver the maximum value within those 12 sprints. But we might end up here or there. We don't know yet. So the question of when is the project completed is kind of hard. Might be after 6 sprints, might be after 12 sprints. It depends on you as well. So if you want people who are in the traditional mindset to understand that, they will also need to be trained and coached to understand, okay, I need to change my thinking in there. I actually think that's the most important part, because if they don't change that and they keep their traditional systems, it's going to be very hard to deliver on that. And the second part is, you can make a release planning and have some people in your team who are able to explain to them how this works and what they expect to be able to deliver within the 12 sprints, for example.
Yeah, that's correctly. I mean, if you talk about the existing team that has been established for such a long time and you want to implement the agile things within the team, it might be very difficult, or it takes time because you have to educate all the teams first to understand all the things actually.
Yes.
Yeah.
They need to, then something needs to click.
Yeah.
Otherwise, why should we do this?
Yeah. Okay.
Thanks for coming.